at him in between writing down the verdict. He did not move a muscle. He stayed completely straight, looking straight ahead with really no look in his face at all.
Alex, thank you.
National political correspondent Alex Miller, stay close. You can see we have team coverage right now covering this story from all angles. I want to bring in legal affairs correspondent Advertisements Burnett, because for those who are just joining us right now, we know that there has been this guilty verdict. The question is, what happens next? What will be the process as we go here to this July 11th sentencing date?
Yeah, well, that is going to be a very significant date, July 11th, when we have sentencing. But there are a few things that need to happen before we have this actual sentencing from the judge. There's this thing known as a pre-sentencing report. This is where there's a certain division of the New York City government where they pretty much look at all of the background of this defendant, the former president who is now convicted, and they get an idea of what the potential sentence should be. Then they send this information over to Judge Juan Merchan. This will just be a recommendation on what they believe the sentence for this particular defendant could be. Remember, for these charges, there are 34 counts here. He was found guilty on all of them. And for each count, there is a possibility. It's a little bit odd, but it's 1 1/3 of a year. That's the floor. And then we could go all the way up to 4 years. So that is the sentencing range for each count. But then there's also the possibility that the former president, whatever the sentence is, those could run together. And so it could be concurrent. So there isn't going to be a scenario, most likely, where if he gets a year and 1/3, for example, where it's a year and 1/3 times 34. If he even gets any jail time, it's likely that the judge here will have it run concurrent. And he does not have to have jail time. There are a few things, there are a few possibilities of what could happen. There could be a fine here, especially because a former president has not been convicted. He does not have a record here. So that's what needs to happen before we actually have the sentencing that is done on July 11th. There's also the possibility that the attorneys for the former president can ask the judge, Judge Juan Merchan, to hold off on everything while they appeal. That is something that is totally different. There's an intermediary court in the state of New York that could look at this matter. According to legal experts who have spoken with, they could have about 30 days to request or notify the court that they want to appeal this actual decision. And then they have about 6 months, according to officials I've spoken with, to actually file this appeal. So there's a notification that they want to appeal this decision. And then there is the actual submission of the documents that says they want to appeal this. So those are all the steps that we have to go through. So even though we have this July 11th date on the calendar, there are a lot of things that could shift between now and then.
And Avajoy, moments ago, we heard from the former president. He said that our country's gone to hell. Those were his words, not mine. He really laid into the Biden administration and blamed Joe Biden for this verdict, Avajoy.
Yeah, and you know, what's very interesting about all of this, it appears as if the former president was preparing the country for what could potentially be a guilty verdict. Even when he quoted people who thought this case should not have been brought in the first place, yesterday when he spoke with the media, even though it was brief, he was preparing them for what could potentially be a guilty verdict. That's when he made that Mother Teresa reference, and then he said, but who knows, we will see. Earlier today, Alina Habba, the attorney who represented him in another New York trial, she also said it was a good sign that the jury was asking questions, but she also said there's this other step of appealing. So it really appeared as if they were preparing for this moment, and now we have a guilty verdict on all 34 counts against the former president.
All right, legal affairs correspondent Advertisements Burnett, thank you. Let's bring in anchor Christian Bryant right now. We saw the former president, Christian. He was very swift in coming out and making remarks, and we're also seeing a lot of reaction on social media from GOP lawmakers.
Yeah, the former president isn't the only person that has a lot to say here. I want to go back to something that our deputy political director, Joe St. George, said. We're hearing from two different juries right after this verdict has been reached. There were the 12 that we heard from, and then there's the court of public opinion. And we're already starting to hear from people who are close to the former president. Let's start with Michael Cohen, the former president's former fixer and also one of the star witnesses. He tweeted, guilty on all counts. counts, along with the screenshot from MSNBC showing the 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. We also are hearing from Donald Trump Jr. One of the things that we were talking about a second ago was reaction from the former president's children. Well, Donald Trump Jr. posted this on X as well. Guilty on all counts, the Democrats have succeeded in their years-long attempt to turn America into a third world S-hole, is what he said. November 5th is our last chance to save it. And the former president said November 5th is when the real verdict will be read out. We also heard from DA Alvin Bragg. He said on X, a very short post here today, a jury found Donald J. Trump guilty on all 34 counts. There's one more that I want to read for our audience here. This is from Speaker Mike Johnson. He had a lengthy statement on X saying, today is a shameful day in American history. Democrats cheered as they convicted the leader of the opposing party on ridiculous charges predicated on the testimony of a disbarred convicted felon. This was a purely political exercise, not a legal one. The weaponization of our justice system has been a hallmark of the Biden administration, and the decision today is further evidence that Democrats will stop at nothing to silence dissent and crush their political opponents. The American people see this as lawfare, and they know it is wrong and dangerous. President Trump will rightfully appeal this absurd verdict, and he will win. Again, as Joe St. George said a bit earlier, two different juries. We heard from the one in the courtroom, and now we're hearing from the folks, the court of public opinion, if you will. And I'm sure that we'll continue to hear more as the day goes on, folks.
Yeah, we're also now hearing from the former president's campaign team. They're sending out fundraising emails in response to this verdict. Christian, thank you. I want to bring in now former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Marie Pereira. She is with us. Marie, give us your take on this historic verdict.
I'm stunned. I didn't think that the jurors would wrap their heads around the convoluted nature of the charges. I didn't think, even given all the facts proven, that the jurors would find that there was a crime committed. I thought it would be jury nullification. I am shocked that they found him guilty because, again, the way the case was put together, the elements of the crime, just the fact that he's found guilty because, to me, it was political strategy. He didn't want the people to know about his dirty deeds with Stormy. So there was an NDA signed and people were paid off. I didn't think the jury would agree that in and of itself he had the intent to commit election fraud based on the background of how this money was paid out. I'm shocked.
And just learned that Alvin Bragg, Manhattan District Attorney, will be having a news conference at 6:30, so about 45 minutes from now, as you take on one side of your screen a live look there outside of the courthouse in Manhattan. Marie, and there you see former President Trump actually leaving the courthouse right now, heading to his motorcade. He will be sentenced on July 11th. We heard him after the sentencing when he walked out of the courtroom, continued to be critical, to say the least, of Juan Merchan, the judge who now holds the power of what the sentence will be for the former president. Former President Trump has been extremely critical of Merchan. He's been critical of Merchan's daughter on social media, in news conferences, the whole deal. How much could that impact what Judge Merchan decides Donald Trump's sentence will be?
I don't think it will impact Judge Merchan's decision. I think he's going to be a neutral judge. I don't think he's going to bring in his personal views on Donald Trump into the sentencing. And as we know, there is going to be a sentencing report, and it's going to examine the nature of the crime, his history, has he had any contact with the criminal justice system. It's also going to talk to Donald about, the person who interviews him is going to discuss how sorry is he? Does he admit that the jurors got it right? Is he still being belligerent? All of that is going to be taken into account when the judge is deciding a sentence. But I don't think the judge is going to take it personal and have a, vengeance against Donald Trump for treating him badly and not abiding to his gag orders and attacking the judge's family. The judge is going to do what's right and follow the law. And I don't think Donald Trump is going to prison for this. I think there will be an appeal, and I think it's not even going to impact his base. They're going to rally around him even more.
And once again, we're taking a live look outside the courthouse in Manhattan. You can see the cameras from the chopper zoomed in on the former president, Donald Trump, as he prepares to leave the courthouse. Marie, once again, there were 34 counts of falsifying business records in connection with allegedly concealing payments to his former attorney fixer, Michael Cohen. This was in connection to an alleged hush money scheme to silence adult film star Stormy Daniels. Marie, I know you said that you were surprised by this decision, but going back to the defense team, in your view, did they actually make a convincing case?
You know what? They didn't make a convincing case. Their case was just really wrapped around the fact that why is this even a crime? They're weaponizing the law. If he weren't Donald Trump, this wouldn't be happening. Michael Cohen is a felon. Everyone is lying. They were all sycophants, just doing Donald Trump a favor, and he was never involved in any conspiracy to commit election fraud. They did what they could, but the law is the law, and the way they put it together, the jurors believed that he broke the law. But defense had nothing more to say except the main witness is a felon, someone who has a gripe to pick with Donald Trump. Nobody likes Donald, and this is just weaponizing the law against him. And the jurors didn't buy it. That's what happened here.
Marie Pereira, former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney. Marie, thank you for your time and insight.
All right, let's bring in White House correspondent Haley Bull right now, who is live outside the White House. What reaction are you hearing, Haley, from the Biden campaign?
Well, Chris, we are hearing from the Biden campaign tonight. They are out with a statement through their communications director that really centers on what they view as a threat to democracy. They write, quote, Donald Trump has always mistakenly believed he would never face consequences for breaking the law for his own personal gain. But today's verdict does not change the fact that the American people face a simple reality. There is still only one way to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, at the ballot box. Convicted felon or not, Trump will be the Republican nominee for president. And this largely reflects the messaging we have heard on the campaign trail that is centered from the Biden campaign on what they view as the stakes of democracy. That statement goes on to accuse Trump of a, quote, unhinged campaign of revenge and retribution. That word unhinged, one we have heard President Biden bring from private remarks behind closed doors to the campaign rally stage this week as he focused on Trump's rhetoric on January 6th on policy. The communications director going on to say, quote, a second Trump term means chaos, ripping away Americans' freedoms and fomenting political violence, and the American people will reject it this November. The campaign setting up a juxtaposition of a picture of chaos they are trying to paint with the former president, with President Biden, as we have seen to date, focused on the job. Now, we have not heard from President Biden himself directly. He has spent the day in Delaware today, also marking the 9th anniversary of his son, Beau Biden's death. In the White House, not commenting on the official side tonight beyond the White House counsel's office spokesperson saying, quote, we respect the rule of law and have no additional comment. The White House has really veered away from commenting directly on Trump's legal troubles, really trying to underscore the message that Biden is on the job, and that is where his sole focus is, even as we have seen Biden ratchet up his criticism of Trump on the campaign trail, but stopped short of directly commenting on his legal troubles. The question here is how much the campaign and how much the president himself leans into that term convicted felon going forward, Chris.
All right, Haley Bull, thank you for that live report. And now we're taking another live look from above as former President Donald Trump has left the courthouse in Manhattan following this historic announcement guilty on all 34 felony counts. We want to bring in now former New York State Judge and Prosecutor Rich Giardino. Rich, for viewers who are just joining us, where do we go from here? What happens next?
So procedurally, what happens is the defense attorneys for President Trump will make a motion to set aside the verdict. It's a pro forma motion. They'll file papers. They'll get the transcript from the trial, and the DA will respond. The court will then review it prior to sentencing. Generally, the court will deny such a motion, and the court's rulings up until now indicate to me that he would deny a motion to set aside the verdict as not based on the facts of the law. Then he will be sentenced by the court. There will be, as your other guest had said, a pre-sentence investigation through probation. Again, as a judge, we look at the facts and circumstances, and we look at the past record or lack of record, in this case of President Trump. While there's prison sentences of a max of 1/3 to 4, this defendant, Mr. President Trump, has no prior criminal record. This is not something that normally one would think would end up in a prison sentence. This is something that if he does sentence him would probably be probation. It's interesting, the timing. The timing is before the convention, shortly before the convention. So from after the sentence, the president's lawyers will seek a stay of the imposition or the execution of the sentence, either by Judge Merchan or by an appellate court. Generally, appellate courts in a case of this nature, it's a nonviolent felony. It's a very unusual case. There's a lot of appealable arguments and issues. I see that either the appellate court or the sentencing judge would issue the stay of execution of the sentence, and the president will be out to campaign while an appeal progresses. That's the legal procedural end. There's also the political side of this, and there's also the disappointment in the criminal justice system that's occurred.
How much room is there for Judge Merchan if he's upset about what former President Trump said about him to factor that into what he decides the sentence to be?
He's not supposed to take personal views or opinions and factor those in, but there's initially, even though it was only $35 donation, he donated to President Biden 4 years ago, and it's the appearance in New York of impropriety. Even if he is not corrupted by the $35 donation, he also donated to anti-Republican organizations. So for those reasons, he should have really stepped aside in the beginning and recused himself. So that's going to be an appealable issue. I think that he was intent on this case because it will be the biggest case of his career ever. He will not get another case of this nature with this publicity. And so I just hope that he plays it down the middle. So far, the rulings I saw and some of the issues raised, I don't think that he was being fair and impartial to Mr. Trump in this case.
Yeah, Rich, give us your take. I mean, how was the performance of the defense team? Obviously, we know the jury handed down this verdict, but just given what you've seen over the past few weeks, I'm just curious to get your take.
Well, here's what people have to understand. The defense has no burden whatsoever. I do think that the judge should not have precluded testimony about some of the things that Cohen had said to others, and he should have allowed an expert to testify about how the federal government viewed these same set of facts. That's very important, and you could argue that those are expert witnesses. So I think the defense team did what they should have done. I think that the prosecution overstepped the bounds. First of all, they used a tape-recorded conversation between Mr. Trump and Mr. Cohen. Mr. Cohen was his lawyer. So unless it's a new crime, Mr. Cohen's tape should not have been allowed. It should have been confidential by attorney-client privilege, and only Mr. Trump can release that privilege. I already mentioned Judge Merchan's donation. I've had friends say, well, it's only $35. I don't care. It shows that he has a predisposition against Mr. against Mr. Trump and for Mr. I think that the defense bar in the state of New York and the defense bar across the country kind of disappointed me. I thought that they should have been louder and spoke out more than a few defense attorneys and said, look, this is wrong. They know that no other defendant has been charged or would be charged under these theories where they take a misdemeanor and elevate it to a felony based on a federal charge. It's just a local prosecutor really should not have been involved in something like this. I think the age of the case when the incident allegedly occurred, and also when the paperwork was filed, it just reeks of politics. And I think from a political standpoint, Alvin Bragg succeeded in what he wanted to do. He tied up President Trump for 6 weeks, and he muddied him up so that now he is a convicted felon at this point, and it'll go up on appeal. I do think ultimately, whether it's the courts in New York or it goes up to the federal court from there, from the Court of Appeals, I think President Trump will have the case reversed, and they will not proceed further.
Rich Giardino, thank you so much for your take. We appreciate it as we break down what just happened over just about 50 minutes ago. That's it. It feels like it's been a lot longer than that. Let's get to Alex Miller, who was inside the courtroom when this verdict was read. Alex, what was the mood of the jury as this was happening?
Very somber as they walked in. They walked very lightly. They just very quietly took their seats. They were asked a couple questions to say in unison, is this your verdict? Do you have a verdict? And they all said it, but they said it quietly, not super emphatically. The foreman got up. He was handed a microphone, and he, I think a good indication of what was to come was that he had no papers in front of him. He was just saying guilty, 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 and there was nothing for him to try to have to memorize. And so as soon as I noticed that, I knew that this was going to start to unfold to be a completely guilty verdict, because he didn't have to reference any specific counts. But again, yeah, they stayed pretty solemn. And they each, again, pretty quietly answered when they were asked individually if this was their verdict.
And Alex, we can hear some of the chants happening right now outside the courtroom. If you can't just, paint the scene for us.
Yeah, this street behind me is completely closed right now to anybody but the NYPD. There are police officers everywhere. We've had these barricades set up the entire trial, but there are more barricades set up. There are more police officers. They are lining the streets behind me, but there are also a bunch of them over my shoulder right here, because just a couple of feet from me is Collect Pond Park, which is where they have been keeping essentially the protesters that have come out. There haven't been that many protesters here over the course of this trial, but this crowd has grown quite substantially over the last hour or so, I would say. People not necessarily coming out to protest one way or another, but I'm watching a lot of people come up, take pictures on their phone, just here to see what this moment really looks like. But I would say there is a substantial presence here that we have not seen, really, I would say, since Trump's arraignment back on April 4th in 2023. Helicopters above us, and certainly a lot of eyes all around us.
And Alex, we have about a minute. How would you characterize the security situation you're seeing outside the courthouse right now?
Heavy security here. I mean, there are officers everywhere paying attention. I've watched their heads be on a swivel for the most part, making sure that nobody can walk. I mean, even journalists who were just exiting the courtroom a little bit after I did all got stopped a couple of feet from me, weren't allowed to get to their positions because they were making sure that the former president was able to exit the courthouse safely. I mean, it is a big operation between Secret Service, court police here, the NYPD outside, to make sure that everything moves smoothly as possible, and to give him, the privacy that he might need.
All right, our national political correspondent Alex Miller live outside the courtroom in Manhattan.
Yeah, a lot to follow up, break down, as we now know that former President Trump is guilty on 34 felony charges of falsifying business records. That came down just about 5:05. That verdict began to be read. And now let's bring in our colleague Chance Seals.
Good evening, gentlemen, and good evening at home across America. I'm Chance Seals in Washington, and we begin this hour with that breaking news. Guilty on all 34 counts. The stunning verdict in Donald Trump's hush money trial came in right around 5 p.m. Eastern, seemingly out of the blue. The jury reaching that decision after deliberating for about 10 hours over the course of 2 days. No American president, sitting or former, has ever been charged criminally before. And Donald Trump is now the first to be convicted.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. But the real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA, and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end and we'll win. Because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now. From prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists. And they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble. But this was a rigged decision right from day one with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
Why should voters vote for convicted felons? Are you going to drop out?
This was the legal outcome, but as you heard right there, Donald Trump pushing straight ahead into the political realm. So let's get into this verdict, the room as this played out, and the fallout after this. National political correspondent Alex Miller joins us live tonight in New York. She's been inside that courtroom every moment of this trial, including waiting on these deliberations. Legal affairs correspondent Advertisements Burnett joining me here in Washington, and we'll be bringing in some lawyers here in a little bit. But Alex, for those joining us right now, flipping on the TV and wondering what happened, guilty across the board, and you were watching Trump's face in that room as this was read out. How did he react?
He was completely stone-faced the entire time. We're able to see his profile as he turned just momentarily to face the jury. He did not look at them for all 34 counts that were read, just for a couple of them. But he had pursed lips, looking intently at them as the foreman read the guilty verdicts. There's a couple of screens that we're able to look at with binoculars. I could see that he was staring straight ahead for the remainder of those verdicts. Clearly, 34 counts was something substantial. I don't know that that was even what the Trump team was expecting completely. All of this was not expected to happen until just a couple of minutes before it did. The jury was set to deliberate until 4:30 p.m., just a little after 4 p.m. The judge came in to tell us that he was going to dismiss them. Both teams were in the courtroom. Trump was in the courtroom, as was his son Eric and his entire entourage that was there. And then it got very quiet for a little bit. The judge left the chamber, or left the courtroom, went back to his chambers. And when he came back, he said around 4:20, the jury had actually decided that they came to a verdict, and they wanted to know if they could have about a half an hour to fill out all of the forms. 30 counts, lots of forms for them to fill out. Obviously, both sides agreed to allow them to do this. And when they came back in the room, they filed in very quietly, and the foreman read all 34 counts. I thought it was incredibly telling at the very beginning that the foreman did not have any notes with him. So after he got through the first few counts, he didn't need to reference anything. And so you knew that this was going to likely be a mostly, if not all, guilty verdict as he went through all of the decisions from the jury.
Well, and while these proceedings, Alex, have tens of millions of eyes on them, there's only a few dozen people that are actually in this room. You've been one of them. What was that moment like?
The moment between finding out that we had a verdict and getting that verdict was incredibly frantic. The internet went out in the room, so you can imagine that with about 60 reporters in there just frantically trying to get everything to work. We're not allowed to use our phones in there. There was a lot of stress in the room in the moments leading up to it. And then the minute the jury walked in, it was like everything stopped and you could cut the tension in there with a butter knife. I mean, it was so tense in there. It's tough to describe. You know, Eric Trump's face the entire time. He also looked straight ahead. He did not move a muscle during the reading of this verdict. You could tell on his face how pained or frustrated he was, not really showing any emotion in any specific way, but just the fact that he did not move at all. I mean, a disappointing, to say the least, verdict for them. But coincidentally, the other side didn't have any emotion during this either. I just want to note, you know, as I'm watching this verdict, I'm sitting right behind Alvin Bragg, just a couple of rows directly behind him. He didn't make any sort of movements during the verdict reading, and even after Trump and his team had left the room, there was no celebrating in there. If there's any celebrating that's to be done, it was going to be done outside of the presence of the reporters.
I see. Let's get Abijoy Burnett in here because she's our legal affairs correspondent who's been tracking this as well. Abijoy, Trump pointed out almost immediately as he exited that courtroom, he said, I could not get a venue change. I wanted one. I only have 5% support here in Manhattan. The fix was in, basically. Is it customary that you would get a venue change if you're really unpopular somewhere?
You really have to make a compelling argument as to why you deserve to have a venue change. And one of the things that you need to prove is that there's been a ton of pretrial publicity, and because of that, you're not able to get an impartial jury. We do know that they went through so many people to try to get this jury seated, and it appears as if there are some people who maybe were on the side of the former president or totally were not against him. And a lot of the questions that were answered, people said, even though they may not agree with some of the things that the former president has said, that they believe that they could be impartial. With the former president, you can't really go anywhere without knowing him. So that whole issue of too much pre-trial publicity, it really did not apply to him. So the attorneys who were involved in this process of trying to pick this jury then had to go to the next level of questioning to figure out if someone is able to be impartial. This is the jury that they landed on: 7 men, 5 women, and those alternates. And so this is what the former president had to deal with. These are the people who deliberated for just under 10 hours and brought forward this verdict. But with regards to him going somewhere else where someone wouldn't already have some sort of opinion on who he is or the allegations against him, that would have been virtually impossible given the fact that he is the former president of the United States, someone who is so well known, not only here in this country, but around the world.
Yeah, so well known and so polarizing as well when you look at the polls. Let's get some more legal context here now. I want to bring in former U.S. District Judge Vanessa Gilmore and criminal defense attorney Robert McWhorter. Robert, when you look at the last 6 weeks or so, and I think the defense put on 2 witnesses total, it was over like this. What were the fatal flaws in the Trump argument as you see it?
Well, I think the fatal flaws, and I can speculate on this, is that Donald Trump decided to follow his own ideas rather than the ideas of his lawyers. I think there were many flaws. The decision on the way to cross-examine Stormy Daniels to try to make her look, shameful, and in reality, she more than held her own. The decision to cross-examine Michael Cohen, for instance, on him just being hateful of Trump, how he dislikes Trump, and therefore he would lie. It just allowed him to explain all the reasons why he dislikes Trump. The decision to kind of go about and put Robert Costello on at the end was just absurd. There was just mistake after mistake, and I have to believe they're following what Donald Trump wanted, and Donald Trump's not following what their advice was.
Ms. Gilmore, based on the questions posed by the jury yesterday and they got answered today, any thoughts on which evidence they found most persuasive here?
Well, what I think that they did was that they looked very carefully at all of the evidence. The fact that they asked for readbacks on particular testimony tells you that they were paying close attention and that they wanted to be sure that they had the recollection of the testimony that they heard. That shows a jury that is very diligent, that is very hardworking, and that takes their job very seriously. What it showed to me is our democracy at work the way that it is supposed to be.
Well, the judge has made clear that he will be the one doing the sentencing, right? And we know that Donald Trump has gone after him. He's gone after his daughter. He has these grievances and says this was unfair to me. Do you think that Judge Merchan will be able to set that aside as a former judge yourself?
Absolutely. All judges know that it's not a popularity contest for us. This is part of what we have to deal with and endure, and not just in high-profile cases like this, but in every case. You have a situation where persons may disparage you or speak ill of you. That cannot and should not, and I don't believe in this case, will have any impact on the judge's decision with regard to what a fair and reasonable sentence is in this case. I have every confidence that the court will look at the evidence and look at the counts of conviction and render a verdict that is fair and reasonable based on the jury's verdict today and based on what is mandated and required under the law. It is a rare occasion where we do not have people casting aspersions at judges.
I see. Yeah, not a popularity contest, as you said. Merchan, you know, he's taking some incoming, you know, so we'll see what happens July 11th. Alex Miller, Avajoy Burnett, former U.S. District Judge Vanessa Gilmore, and Robert McWhorter, thank you all so much. We'll keep this conversation going, but after this break, we continue our coverage of former President Trump's hush money verdict. Guilty on every count. Stick with us. You're watching The Race on Scripps News.
Helping families with mesothelioma is all we do. Our firm has been offering a free book on mesothelioma for over 10 years. Since that time, thousands with mesothelioma have trusted us to represent them against those responsible. We have local offices throughout the U.S. Mesothelioma really is all we do, and there is no risk to you. Let us put a plan in place for you and your family. Call now.
Call us at 800-642-9300 or go to mesobook.com.
As the candidates race toward the White House, America hopes for a clean and fair election. But do your kids understand what that means? It's why my team created the Kids Guide to the Presidential Election. As your kids read it, they'll discover how elections are won and how to ensure that every legal vote is counted and what happens when they're not. All future voters need this guide, and you can have it for free.
To order, visit freeelectionbundle.com. That's freeelectionbundle.com.
Sometimes it's hard to see past the looming repair and replacement costs all around your house. Finally, you can stop seeing money and start saving money with First American Home Warranty. First American covers the systems and appliances you depend on every day. Air conditioning, refrigerator, washer and dryer, electrical, plumbing, even your garage door opener, and more.
We've had our hot water tank replaced, washer fixed, with our upstairs and downstairs AC units fixed or replaced.
If there's one guarantee in home ownership, it's that things are going to break down. That's why I tell all my customers, get First American before your next repair.
There's always something that's going to break.
When an appliance or system breaks down, First American sends a trusted contractor to fix it. And if they can't repair the covered item, we'll make sure they replace it.
When you put in a request for service, it's like that.
We had a contractor out within 24 hours because he said, I didn't want you guys to go another day without heat.
As a contractor, they're so easy to deal with. They truly want me to do right by their members.
Members pay low monthly rates with unlimited claims and 24/7 customer service. And filing a claim does not increase your rate.
We've saved thousands of dollars with First American that we've been able to reinvest into our home.
I looked at more than one, and this was the best.
First American has been a trusted name for decades and is highly rated by customers on major review sites.
They follow through on what they say they're going to do. So that's everything.
But with all the repairs, the plan has been paid for many times over.
And now you can lock in your low monthly rate. All plans include a no questions asked money back guarantee and flexible payment options so you can never pay for covered repairs again. Don't miss out. Ask about today's special bonus offer. Call 1-800-239-1882 now or go online to get your free no obligation quote. So call now.
Guilty across the board. We continue our breaking coverage tonight of the verdict in the Trump hush money trial in New York. The jury convicting the former president on all 34 felony counts. Joining me now is former editor-at-large at CNN and author now of the So What newsletter on Substack, Chris Cillizza. Chris, this is a legal case, but the implications in the political world, they cannot be overstated probably. Trump, now a convicted felon. Mark Caputo was on with me last night, and he said actually he found out the Trump campaign already had guilty merch ready to sell. Does Trump care that he's a felon now? Should he care?
So, yes, he should absolutely 100% care, because when you're running for president, you'd rather not be a felon than be a felon. No matter what you say about the justice system and whether this was rigged and all that sort of stuff, you'd prefer not to have a felony conviction while you're running for president. And the sentencing on July 11th to be 4 days before the Republican National Convention opens. Does that mean that Donald Trump won't, to your point, raise a ton of money off of this? No, he absolutely will. Does it mean that the base will abandon Donald Trump? No, they absolutely won't. We've already seen that in the early reactions from Republican elected officials and the like. But here's, I think, why it does matter. We're almost certainly talking about 6 states that are going to decide this thing, right? And in those 6 states, if you look back at the 2016 margin and the 2020 margin, they're so narrow. I cite Wisconsin because to me, it's the best example. In Wisconsin in 2016, Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton by around 20,000 votes out of 4+ million cast. In 2020, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by about 20,000 votes out of 4.5 million plus cast. We're not talking about a lot of voters that might say, you know what, like, I'm okay with Trump. Maybe I like the economy under him, but like, I just don't feel good about voting for a guy who's a convicted by a jury of his peers felon. It doesn't have to be a huge amount of voters. It can be a very small amount of voters for it to matter. And that, if I'm the Trump campaign, that's what worries me. There's not going to be a poll tomorrow or at any point where it's Joe Biden 60, Donald Trump 40. Not going to happen. But remember, with very small margins, you don't need that many people moving for it to have a pretty big impact.
I see. Okay. Well, so we got a soundbite from Donald Trump. Then we just saw a video there. I don't know if you could see it. He was outside the courthouse raising his fist, doing this kind of, he's not going to hang his head in shame and go away. How does the Biden campaign handle this?
So I'll admit I was a little bit surprised earlier this week with the Robert De Niro press conference outside the courthouse, because I thought that the Biden campaign had played it pretty well, which is when your opponent is under is under an indictment, and is facing charges and is in an ongoing trial, you don't really need to get in the way of that, right? Like, just let it play out. So I was a little surprised they did that. Biden himself has really kind of stayed away from commenting on it. I think he's going to say something. My guess is it's going to be sort of above the fray. Like, look, a jury of his peers found Donald Trump guilty of this. It's one of many things he has done that are breaking the norms, the rules, and yes, in this case, the laws of this country. It's why he cannot be allowed to be elected president again. I don't think they're going to get in the way of the story much more than that, because again, let's just revisit what we're talking about here. Donald Trump was found guilty of falsifying business records in an attempt to cover up hush money payments paid to a porn star with whom he allegedly had an affair. Like, if you're Joe Biden's campaign, you don't really need to dress that up all that much. You kind of just need to say to undecided voters in those 6 swing states, here's the thing, right, that I just said, and here's what happened.
But Chris, real quick, because I know we don't have much time, given all of that you just set up there, this does not strike me as a Neil Armstrong moment or O.J. Simpson moment where everyone's sitting around the TV, even though this is history. Where does this rate on the niche moment to omni moment?
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to have a sort of MASH finale anymore, right? I mean, there's just too many options for people to consume, right? There's streaming, there's YouTube, so yes, it's not that. And I would argue, honestly, everything except the Super Bowl and maybe the Champions League final in soccer, there's really nothing else that meets that bar. My guess is I don't think there's that many people consuming this live and watching every second of it. And the people who are, candidly, have already made up their mind either for or against Trump because they're probably political or legal junkies. The question is, like, how does this seep into the sort of public consciousness for the very small number of people, 3, 4, 5% of people who are still undecided in this race? And does it move, again, it doesn't need to move all of them, but does it move 1 or 2% of them, right? I don't think this is a cultural happening, even though it is quite historic. I think this is a kind of thing that in a month, we might have some sense in a swing state or two what impact, if any, it had. If all of a sudden Joe Biden, who his numbers have not moved in a positive way in months, if all of a sudden Joe Biden is moving up or Donald Trump is moving down, I hesitate to say correlation equals causation, but there might be a reason for that.
Okay, well, I'm sure Team Biden looking for a guilty bump here. We'll see. Veteran political reporter, penman of the So What Substack, Chris Cillizza. Thank you so much. And to follow him, by the way, sign up for free, chriscillizza.substack.com. We'll see you soon, Chris. Thank you so much. We'll be right back.
We get it. Learning something new is hard, especially a new language. So make it easy on yourself with Babbel, the language learning app that teaches real-world conversation for any situation. Babbel is more than vocab memorization. It teaches practical phrases you'll actually use. Say auf Wiedersehen to I give up. Au revoir to it's too hard. And hola to real conversations with real people in a new language. Ready to find your follow-through? Get Babbel. It starts here. Start learning today at Babbel.com.
I used to think all doctors were the same. Then I switched to Oak Street Health. You see, this isn't your typical doctor's office. Instead of waiting around for me to get sick, they focus on keeping me healthy and feeling good. Hey, hey!